The air crackled with forced smiles and the clinking of silverware, but beneath it, I could feel the tremor of what was coming. My carefully constructed world was about to shatter. The echoes of their laughter still ring in my ears, a soundtrack to my humiliation. They thought they had cornered me. They were wrong. The taste of the overcooked roast was like ash in my mouth as I realized the battle had only just begun. If you have a toxic sister who would smile as your own parents turned against you, subscribe right now. But my words fell on deaf ears. They had already made up their minds. They had found me guilty. Then the hammer blow fell. My father leaned forward, his eyes cold and hard, and uttered the words that would forever be etched in my memory. Nobody needs your money, or you. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. My breath caught in my throat. The words hung in the air, heavy with malice and disregard. I looked to my mother for some sign of compassion, some indication that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But her face was impassive, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder. Sarah, her eyes glittering with triumph, simply nodded in agreement. I stared in disbelief, struggling to process the enormity of their betrayal. How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally say such a thing? How could they dismiss my worth as a human being so casually? I wanted to scream, to lash out, to defend myself against their cruel and unjust accusations, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by shock and grief. The pain was so intense, so overwhelming, that it threatened to consume me entirely. I sat in silence, my head bowed, trying to regain control of my emotions. They mistook my silence for defeat. They thought they had broken me. But inside, a fire was beginning to burn. A fire of defiance, a fire of determination, a fire of revenge. I would not let them win. I would not let them define me. I would show them that I was more than just money. I would show them that I was a force to be reckoned with. The person I trusted most was one of them. The following days were a torturous exercise in maintaining a facade of normalcy. I forced myself to go to work, to attend meetings, to interact with clients, all while battling a crushing wave of sadness and self-doubt. I tried to focus on my business, to immerse myself in the tasks at hand, but my concentration was shot. Every email, every phone call, every conversation seemed like a reminder of my failure, of my inability to win the approval of my own family. I replayed their accusations in my head, dissecting every word, searching for some kernel of truth, some justification for their harsh judgment. Was I too focused on money? Had I neglected my personal relationships? Was I really as selfish and unfeeling as they claimed? The questions swirled in my mind, fueling my insecurity and eroding my confidence. I found myself withdrawing from friends and colleagues, afraid to reveal the depth of my pain, ashamed of the vulnerability I had so carelessly exposed. I became a master of disguise, masking my inner turmoil with a carefully crafted smile and a facade of cheerful competence. But beneath the surface, I was crumbling. Driven by a desperate need for reconciliation, I attempted to reach out to my parents. I called them, hoping to explain my side of the story, to bridge the gap that had so suddenly widened between us. But my calls went unanswered. I sent emails, pouring my heart out in heartfelt messages of love and regret, but received only silence in return. Sarah, however, responded with a mocking text message that seemed to twist the knife even deeper. "They're finally seeing you for who you really are," she wrote. "Stop trying to manipulate them with your money. It's not going to work this time." Her words confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a calculated effort to isolate me, to undermine my self-worth, to sever my ties with the people I loved most. My attempts at reconciliation rebuffed, I tried a different approach. I sought professional help, hoping that a therapist could provide some insight into my family dynamics and help me navigate this painful situation. But even therapy offered little solace. The therapist listened patiently to my story, offering words of encouragement and suggesting coping mechanisms, but nothing seemed to penetrate the wall of despair that had enveloped me. I felt like a broken record, endlessly repeating the same grievances, the same feelings of hurt and betrayal. The therapist suggested family counseling, but I knew that was a futile endeavor. My parents had already made up their minds. They weren't interested in understanding my perspective. They only wanted to punish me for daring to deviate from their expectations. Sleepless nights continued. I lost weight. I could barely look at myself in the mirror. The happy, confident person I once was had vanished, replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger haunted by the specter of rejection.
Then, one evening, while aimlessly scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post that stopped me in my tracks. It was a picture of my parents and Sarah, beaming with happiness, posing in front of a brand new luxury car. The caption read, "So grateful for Sarah's incredible generosity. She always knows how to make us feel loved." A wave of nausea washed over me. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. It wasn't about my money. It was about Sarah's. She had been subtly poisoning my parents against me for years, manipulating them with her own acts of generosity, fostering a sense of resentment towards my success. She had been playing the long game, carefully orchestrating my downfall, all while pretending to be the dutiful, supportive sister. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. My silence ended. The plan was about to begin. The revelation about the car felt like the final push, sending me spiraling into an abyss of despair. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. The world around me seemed to fade into a dull, gray blur. My business, once my source of pride and purpose, now felt like a meaningless burden. What was the point of achieving success if I had no one to share it with, if my own family viewed it as a threat? The faces of my parents and Sarah haunted my waking hours, their smiles twisted into grotesque caricatures of love and acceptance. I saw them everywhere, in every crowd, in every reflection, their presence a constant reminder of my isolation and worthlessness. I started avoiding social situations, fearing the pitying glances and the awkward inquiries about my family. I felt like an outcast, a leper, unworthy of human connection. My apartment became my prison, a sanctuary from the outside world, but also a cage that confined me to my own misery. The wall seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with a sense of hopelessness. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, lost in a labyrinth of negative thoughts, unable to find a way out. The weight on my chest was almost unbearable, a physical manifestation of the emotional pain that threatened to consume me. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. I started questioning my sanity. Was I imagining things? Was I exaggerating the extent of their betrayal? Was I simply being overly sensitive and self-pitying? The doubts gnawed at my mind, eroding my sense of self-worth and fueling my descent into darkness. One particularly bleak morning, I found myself standing on my balcony, staring down at the street below. The city buzzed with activity, a symphony of sounds and sights that seemed utterly foreign to me. People rushed to and fro, their faces etched with purpose and determination. They had places to go, people to see, lives to live. I envied them their normalcy, their ability to navigate the world without the crushing weight of despair. A sudden impulse washed over me, a fleeting thought of simply ending it all. It would be so easy, I reasoned, to simply step over the edge and let the darkness consume me. The pain would be gone. The emptiness would be filled. I closed my eyes, imagining the release, the finality of it all. But then a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a spark of anger that refused to be extinguished. Who were they to drive me to this point? Who were they to make me feel so worthless, so hopeless? They didn't deserve to win. They didn't deserve to see me broken and defeated. The thought of them gloating over my demise fueled my resolve. I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not let them have the final word. I stumbled back from the railing, my heart pounding in my chest. The urge to vanish had passed, replaced by a burning desire to fight back, to reclaim my life, to seek revenge. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet contemplation, carefully analyzing my situation, identifying my enemies, and formulating a plan. I realized that I had been playing their game, adhering to their rules, and allowing them to define my worth. It was time to change the game. It was time to take control. I started by severing all contact with my family. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and unfollowed them on social media. I needed to create space for myself, to distance myself from their toxic influence. I then turned my attention to my business. I had allowed my personal problems to affect my work, and it was time to rectify that. I threw myself into my projects with renewed vigor, channeling my anger and frustration into creative energy. I worked tirelessly, pushing myself to my limits, determined to prove to myself and to them that I was capable of achieving anything I set my mind to. As I immersed myself in my work, I began to feel a sense of empowerment. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist, a planner, a force to be reckoned with. The darkness that had enveloped me began to recede, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. They thought they had ended me. They were wrong. I was just getting started. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable.
I smiled. I played their game, but I was recording everything. My first step was gathering information. I needed to understand the full extent of Sarah's manipulations and the specific ways she had influenced my parents. I started subtly, casually bringing up financial topics in conversation, feigning ignorance about certain investments and asking for her advice. Each time, she eagerly offered her expertise, unaware that I was meticulously documenting every detail. I learned about her dealings, the sources of her income, and the extent of her financial control over my parents. It became clear that her generosity wasn't simply a matter of kindness. It was a calculated strategy to secure their loyalty and undermine my position in the family. I discovered that she had been secretly funneling money into my parents' accounts for years, making them increasingly dependent on her support, while simultaneously disparaging my own financial success. I also found evidence that she had been spreading rumors about me behind my back, exaggerating my flaws, and painting me as a selfish, uncaring individual. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became. Her betrayal was even more insidious than I had initially imagined. To solidify my evidence, I took precautions. Recognizing the sensitivity of the information, I consulted with a private investigator, a former law enforcement officer with expertise in digital forensics. He helped me secure my devices, ensuring that my communications were encrypted and my data was protected from unauthorized access. He also advised me on the legal aspects of my investigation, warning me about the potential risks of surveillance and defamation. He taught me how to properly document evidence, how to maintain a chain of custody, and how to present my findings in a way that would be admissible in court, should it come to that. I installed hidden cameras in strategic locations around my apartment, capturing footage of my interactions with Sarah. I recorded our phone calls, carefully obtaining her consent each time, all the while making sure she never suspected a thing. The act was exhausting, but knowing I was building an airtight case kept me going. One evening, Sarah came over, ostensibly to check on me, but I suspected she was really there to assess the damage. I played the part of the wounded sibling, feigning vulnerability and expressing my confusion about my parents' behavior. She lapped it up, offering empty platitudes and saccharine reassurances. As she spoke, I noticed a glint of triumph in her eyes, a barely concealed satisfaction that confirmed my suspicions. I excused myself to get some water, my hands shaking with barely restrained rage. I could hear her rummaging through my things while I was in the kitchen. As soon as I walked back into the living room, she immediately stopped and acted as if nothing had happened. She asked me if I was sure I was okay and if I wanted her to stay the night. I told her I just needed some sleep, and she left. I knew I had to be patient. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I had to gather enough evidence to expose her manipulations and reclaim my reputation, not just with my parents, but with everyone else she had poisoned against me. To that end, I decided to stage a meeting with my parents, ostensibly to try and mend fences, but in reality, to record their reactions and gather further evidence of Sarah's influence. I knew it was a risky move, but I felt it was necessary to expose the truth. I arranged the meeting at a neutral location, a public park where I felt less vulnerable. I wore a hidden camera disguised as a button on my shirt, and I had my private investigator stationed nearby, just in case things got out of hand. As I sat there waiting for my parents to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. What if they refused to listen to me? What if they simply dismissed my concerns as paranoia? What if Sarah had already poisoned them beyond repair? When they finally arrived, their faces were grim, their eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. They barely acknowledged my presence, settling onto the park bench with an air of resentment. I launched into my carefully rehearsed speech, expressing my love for them and my regret for any pain I may have caused. But my words fell on deaf ears. They accused me of being selfish, greedy, and out of touch with their values. They parroted Sarah's accusations, repeating the same rumors and exaggerations I had already heard. I tried to defend myself, to explain my perspective, but they wouldn't let me finish. They were too blinded by Sarah's lies. The encounter ended as abruptly as it had begun. My parents stood up and walked away, leaving me sitting alone on the park bench, feeling more isolated and defeated than ever. But as they left, I caught a glimpse of Sarah lurking in the distance, a smug smile on her face. It was all the confirmation I needed. The trap had been set. Now it was time to spring it. The day I discovered the truth about Sarah's generosity was the day she signed her own destruction warrant. While meticulously reviewing the financial documents I had subtly acquired, each one a breadcrumb she unknowingly left for me, I found it. A series of transactions leading back to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The company's sole purpose was to funnel money from Sarah's business into my parents' accounts, disguised as gifts and investments. But the real kicker? The source of Sarah's wealth wasn't the successful marketing firm she always bragged about. It was from exploiting vulnerable people. Her company wasn't about building brands. It was a deceptive marketing machine. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The revelation was so sickening, so utterly devoid of any moral compass, that it took my breath away.
I wasn't just dealing with a manipulative sister. I was dealing with a predator. All this time she was playing the angel, she was secretly preying on others. The pieces all clicked into place, and the plan began solidifying. It was time to set the trap.
My parents gasped, their eyes widening in horror as they watched the truth unfold before them. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the projector and Sarah's ragged breathing. The game was over. The trap had been sprung. Now it was time for the final act. The silence in the room was deafening as the video concluded, the damning evidence hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah stood frozen, her face a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief. The carefully constructed facade of the benevolent sister had shattered, revealing the cruel, calculating monster beneath. My parents stared at the screen, their expression shifting from shock to anger to a dawning realization of the depths of Sarah's betrayal. It was as if a veil had been lifted from their eyes, and they were finally seeing their precious daughter for who she truly was. The air crackled with tension, the unspoken accusations heavy in the room. "Sarah," my father finally choked out, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "What is the meaning of this?" Sarah stammered, trying to deny the undeniable, but the evidence was overwhelming. The lies, the manipulations, the financial misdeeds, it was all there, plain as day. She tried to deflect, to blame me for orchestrating some elaborate conspiracy, but my parents weren't buying it. They had seen the truth with their own eyes, the truth I had been desperately trying to show them. The private investigator I hired entered the room and identified himself. He stated, "I am here to ensure nothing escalates and that all evidence is safely acquired." Sarah's eyes darted around the room as she started to realize her world was crumbling. I watched her as she was finally processing that this was the end of the road for her charade. The fallout was swift and brutal. My parents, heartbroken and enraged, immediately severed all ties with Sarah. They demanded that she return every penny she had siphoned from their accounts, threatening legal action if she refused. Their lawyer was on standby in the next room, ready to ensure that Sarah was immediately brought to justice for her crimes. Sarah's company was soon under intense scrutiny, her predatory practices exposed to the public. Clients fled, investors pulled out, and her reputation was irrevocably tarnished. What was once a thriving business empire crumbled into dust, leaving her financially ruined and socially ostracized. The authorities began investigating her for fraud and exploitation. The weight of her crimes began to crush her. The karma she put out in the world finally came back to her tenfold. She had lost everything, her family, her fortune, her freedom. I watched it all unfold with a cold, detached satisfaction. I had finally avenged the wrongs she had inflicted upon me. I had exposed her lies and reclaimed my life. She thought she could walk all over me, but she didn't know who she was dealing with.
In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my parents. It wasn't easy. The damage Sarah had caused ran deep, and it would take time to heal. But with patience, understanding, and a willingness to forgive, we slowly began to mend the broken bonds of our family. They finally apologized. My parents were truly sorry for the way they had treated me, acknowledging that they had been blinded by Sarah's manipulations. They vowed to never let anyone come between us again. As for Sarah, she vanished from our lives, disappearing into the shadows, presumably to escape the consequences of her actions. I heard rumors that she had fled the country, seeking refuge in some distant land where she could start anew. But no matter where she went, she would never be able to escape the weight of her guilt. The truth would always haunt her. Her past actions would catch up to her eventually. There was no escaping justice. The day I learned that Sarah's assets had been seized and that she was facing multiple criminal charges, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The scales of justice had finally been balanced. She would never be able to hurt anyone again. I had finally put an end to her reign of terror. It had taken patience, planning, and a willingness to play the game, but I had emerged victorious. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's about reclaiming what was taken from you, about standing up for yourself and refusing to be a victim. It's about holding those who wrong you accountable for their actions. In the end, it's about justice. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.